The secret to broiler production is hinged upon what you do within the first 10 days of life. And in this video, I'll be sharing two case studies, two farms, between Mr. A and Mr. B. What Mr. A did right and did wrong that got him between 1.2 and 1.6 kg in 6 weeks, and what Mr. B did right, or what modifications we did in Mr. B's farm that ensured that he got around 3 kg of body weight at 6 weeks. Yeah, I will be talking to you about what you need to do within the first 10 days of life. Then beyond 10 days of life, what you also need to do to achieve this weight at 35 days of life, or even if you want to keep it up until 48 days of life or 6 weeks. Stay tuned to the end so that you don't miss out on any of the juicy information we have for you on how to achieve this within the first 35 days of life or within the first 6 weeks of life. Yeah, good day and welcome. I'm Dr. Tommy Welts, your progressive friend and partner. And today I'll be talking about what you need to do to ensure that you get the exact target weight that ensures that your farm stays profitable in broiler production. Before me here are broiler birds of 6 weeks old, and there are some things that we imbibe, or there are some key things we made sure that we did when we received these birds from the very beginning. Now, some of these things I want to itemize them for you and talk to you about them and how you can incorporate it in your farm and see that you achieve at least 3 kg of body weight at 6 weeks. Now, the first thing that is very important when you get your birds starts from the hatchery. By this I mean sorting your birds very well, making sure that their bodies are dried, making sure that their nevers are properly healed, and making sure that the birds are formating and they are active. When you have successfully sorted your birds at the hatchery, the next thing you need to do is the housing where you want to keep those birds. Make sure that the heat is optimal between 30 degrees Celsius and 33 degrees Celsius. And also, you also have to make sure that there's enough ventilation. By ventilation, I mean there's enough oxygen in the room. Yes, for brooding, we need both heat and ventilation to achieve success. Now, after you must have done this, another thing you need to focus on or pay attention to is the number of feeders that is available for these birds. Like I told you, at this age, they should not exceed 12 birds per feeder. Why am I saying this? This reduces competition and it makes sure that each of the birds are able to feed as at when they should, especially when the feed is served and till when the feed is finally consumed. Now, other than the feeder, you also have to pay attention to the drinkers. You have to make sure that the drinkers are optimal and that one drinker serves between 25 to 50 birds per time. Other than that, another key thing that people miss out on is the grammage of feed that the birds need to maintain. At the first week of life, each of those birds, they consume 18 grams per day. This is where mistakes come in. Some people underfeed or some people overfeed. They waste feed and, you spend more and you are not able to get what you ought to get. So, very importantly, it's important to make sure that within the first week of life, each of these birds consume on a daily basis at least 18 grams of feed per bird. When this is done, we are not just feeding any kind of feed. We are feeding feeds that are high in protein. And this protein ranges from between 22% crude protein and 24% crude protein. Now, when you are selecting the first feed to give your birds, you have to make sure that the energy is intact and the protein level is adequate. Now, when this is done, you'll be able to make sure that within that first 10 days of life, your birds are already chasing around 300 grams per bird within the first 10 days of life. Now, another thing you need to pay attention to is the lighting system. When you receive birds, some people do not give artificial lighting. What do I mean by artificial lighting? We have 12 hours of daylight from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at night. But beyond this 7 p.m., it's good to also give artificial light on your farm. Why are we giving artificial light on our farm? Is to make sure that these birds, their ability to consume feed is increased. So within the first 3 days of life, the birds only rest for between 2 to 3 hours. That is, when you receive your birds, you turn on the light from 7 p.m. They do not know that there is darkness till around 4 a.m. Why are we doing this within the first 3 days of life? Is to make sure that the birds are able to consume as much food as possible. Why? Why is this important? It's important because it will help with crop development and it will help with muscle accumulation or muscle building. So other than that, once you've been able to achieve that, after the first week, you reduce the amount of lighting you give these birds every hour. That means, if for example, for the first week, I gave these birds, I was turning off the light at 3 or 4 a.m. By the next week, I'll be turning off the light by 2 a.m. I hope you understand. So within that 6 weeks of life that we want to raise these birds, we are turning up the light every week by an hour less. I don't know if you understand what I mean. So it means if, for example, the birds are resting for 2 hours, within the first week, the next week they'll be resting for 3 hours. The one following it, they'll be resting for 4 hours. I hope that's clear. So another thing you need to pay attention to, especially within the first 10 days of life, is the practices most people use antibacterial or antibiotics. Now, the advice I would give you is not to start with something very strong. Why am I saying this? It's important that you give room for when you have this disease, because sometimes when the birds are coming from hatchery, yes, they come down with some diseases, but sometimes they do not have these diseases. And when you are exposing organisms that ought not to be exposed to these drugs, you're exposing them to these drugs unduly. When they now come down with this disease, because the organisms are used to this drug, that drug will no longer work for this disease. So what I advise is we use drugs that are not so strong. Use drugs that some of these drugs like that are in the tetracycline class, or drugs that that would be able to keep the microflora of the birds alive. Now, one of the practices you need to pay attention to, regardless of whether it is at the first 10 days of life or if it's beyond 10 days of life, is these two very key managemental errors that people make. The first one is your feeders ought to be cleaned at least once every week. Here in this farm, we clean our feeders once in 3 days. Why are we cleaning it? Is because sometimes these birds, they defecate on these feeders. And if you don't clean it, all of those organisms or antigens that are lodged in the feces, the birds are able to pick it up and they infect the birds. I hope that's clear. Now, another thing we do is that here, our drinkers are washed and disinfected every day. So what we do is we get more than enough drinkers. The drinkers they want to use tomorrow, we wash and disinfect today, so that when we want to use it tomorrow, it's already dried and it's ready for use. Now, the last thing you need to pay attention to is the litter. Make sure that you pack your litters regularly. On this farm or in this pen house, we do not exceed at most 2 weeks before the litters are changed. If you can and you have the resources, you can change your litters every week, and you'll be sure that diseases like coccidiosis, necrotic enteritis, or things that affect the gut, your birds will not come down with those diseases. So if you're able to do all of this or put all of this in place, we talked about the feeding, making sure that you feed the actual grammage to each of those birds. You make sure that the number of feeders are adequate. You make sure that the number of drinkers are adequate. You make sure that the spacing of these birds are adequate, and that your hygiene practice is top notch. If you're able to do this and limit the number of people that come into where these birds stay, if you're able to do this, I assure you'll be able to get at least between 2.7 and 3 kg at 6 weeks. So very quickly, I want to highlight some of the things that affected Mr. A that we didn't have a problem with Mr. B. Mr. A collected 100 birds when he had capacity to raise 50. And, he's able to feed within the first week of life. And afterwards, he started milling his own food by himself. Mr. A is not a professional and is new into the business. What did he do? He got maize and all of that, but, not paying attention to what the energy requirements of these birds are and what the protein requirements of these birds are. So if you want to go into broiler farming, if you have capacity for 100, go for 50. If you're able to raise 50 very well, it's more profitable than you struggling to feed 100. So I hope you've learned something today. If you are in Mr. A's position, please, instead of taking 100, if you can take 30, take 30 and raise them very well. And I assure you, you'll be able to, if you implement all of the things we've stressed, prior to this time, you'll be able to achieve between 2.7 and 3 kg of body weight. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I remain your friend and your progressive partner. See you in the next video.